Good. I think we'll make a start, and perhaps we can begin by issuing yet another welcome to everybody. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for taking the trouble to come. We have had quite a number of apologies for a whole variety of reasons, including, of course, continuing COVID. And those of you who are new, you're especially welcome. I appreciate that looking around the assembled gathering, you'll see all these unbelievably intelligent and holy-looking people, which is probably a little intimidating. But can I suggest that if you are new, you would like to find somebody you know or somebody you don't, and perhaps they can initiate you into the mysteries of Diocesan Synod and help you to understand how unbelievably normal and ordinary we actually all are. And so, lovely to see you. You have been sent a copy of standing orders and a short briefing note about Synod and how it works. Some people have already pointed out that standing orders are not written in a very inclusive way and could do with being updated. And that is in process of happening. It's taking place. So by next triennium, it will have been completed. By March. Well, there we are, by March. Can't get better than that. And in the meantime, they do regulate the way in which we operate. So we move on to apologies and membership. You received a membership list with the agenda, and there are quite a number of vacancies, you may have noticed, especially in the House of Laity. And so those of you who are now members, or have been members for many years, please do encourage your synods to fill the vacancies if that is possible. And on the agenda, there's a motion through which Synod appoints its members as the members of the Board of Finance. And that's because here in this diocese, Synod and the Diocesan Board of Finance are one and the same thing. So you may not have realized that, but you were becoming a member of the Board of Finance when you signed up to be a member of Synod as well. This has the effect of making governance much simpler. It helps to connect mission and finance together rather than keeping them apart in silos. And the excluded persons who were referred to on the agenda, it sounds a little unkind, but actually that's because they are employees of the Board of Finance who would have a conflict of interest if they were also members of the company that pays their salaries. And actually there's only one person in that category who is also an elected member of the Synod. Apologies, we've talked about membership, and we I think have to approve the nomination by the Bishops' Council of all of us, other than those who are defined as excluded persons, to company membership of the Carlisle Diocesan Board of Finance. So do we need a show of hands for that? If you're happy that we should all be members of the Board of Finance, please raise a hand. Thank you very much. Technologically very advanced in our voting methods here, as you can see. That's great. Thank you. So the minutes. We need to approve and sign the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 15th of June 2021. Some of you were at that meeting, some are not. You'll have seen the minutes, paper B, in your pile. Are those who were present happy that those are an accurate record? Excellent. I will sign them duly. Thank you. Thank you. So, matters arising, just so that we're clear, I have two matters arising, one of which is down here on the sheet. Does anybody else have a matter arising from those minutes which they wish to raise now? So we're clear on timings. Okay, well, perhaps I can launch into a couple of things. One is the vacancy in the See of Penrith. You'll all know about the departure of Bishop Emma, who left at the end of May to become bishop to the archbishops of Canterbury and York. The post used to be called Bishop at Lambeth, but part of her role is to try and bring Lambeth and Bishopthorpe a little closer together, not geographically, because that would be impossible, but in terms of their communication with one another. Her departure has left some significant gaps, not least with regard to oversight of the God for All support team and the further development of our God for All vision and strategy, with which she was very closely connected. But replacing her and appointing a new Bishop of Penrith is not altogether straightforward, and there are two reasons for that. One is because if a suffragan bishop goes, we have to get permission from the diocese commission, so-called, to appoint another one. That applies to every diocese. And just at the moment, bishops are a bit of an endangered species, and there is a bit of culling going on. And so it's not a foregone conclusion that another Bishop of Penrith would be authorised. The second slight problem with all of this is the agreement that given cuts to the number of stipendiary clergy in our parishes over several years, cuts which I should say are now happening in large numbers in some other dioceses, in fact most other dioceses around the country. We've had to do it very gradually. Some are doing it all in one go now. Given those cuts, we did agree that we would review the overall number of bishops and archdeacons in the diocese. So thus far, we've done two things. The first is that I have now written to the Diocese Commission to discover whether, in principle, permission might be forthcoming. Because if they say no, then that's the end of the matter altogether, and so be it. So we're not committing ourselves to anything by doing that, but we're just trying to discover whether or not it would be a possibility. The second thing we've done is to appoint somebody called Stephen Linus, who was chaplain to the Bishop of Bath and Wells, is now retired. He only recently, he was a member of General Synod. He knows the church inside out, and we've asked him to undertake a consultation around the diocese later on this month. So he will be talking with a number of people, talking certainly with all the senior staff team, but many others as well, and trying to get people's views and put them all together. And the result of both those things, a reply from the Diocese Commission and the results of that consultation, will go to Bishop's Council. But I should say that even if the decision is made to appoint a new Bishop of Penrith, the new bishop probably would not be in place before next Easter, so we will have had a year's gap. Now, going on from that, I would like to mention the Mary Port situation, because it ties in with the whole question of bishops and archdeacons. Because while this consultation on the roles and numbers of bishops and archdeacons is going on, we can't actually put other operational needs just on hold. And a decision has been made to create what we're calling a New Start team, to work in parishes where there are particular issues and where, in all likelihood, if we were to advertise for a replacement when the present one retires or moves, we wouldn't get any applicants. And that applies particularly on the West Coast and begins with Maryport, where the current vicar is just retiring kind of now, this week. Archdeacon Richard, who has just had to leave because he's got to go down to his mother-in-law, he feels very strongly called to head up that team and devote at least half his time to Maryport as their new vicar. And we're very grateful to him for that. But if he's working half-time as vicar of Maryport, that leaves quite a big gap in some of the archidiaconal responsibilities that he currently fulfills. And the solution we found to that is to appoint Stuart Fife, who's currently the vicar of Moorland and surrounding parishes, and the Royal Dean of Appleby, to job share the Archdeacon's role and to share in the leadership of that New Start team, with a probable replication of the Maryport experiment in places such as Aspatria in due course. In other words, we're looking at several jobs here: the Archdeacon of Westcumberland's job, Vicar of Maryport, Vicar of Aspatria. Tim Herbert has announced that he'll be leaving Aspatria, and so on. And the idea is at present that those three jobs would be done by those two people. At least one member of our synod has asked about this. Others, I'm sure, are curious as to what's going on quite. And I hope it will be apparent from what I've said that we're not trying to create new posts here, but we are trying to be creative about existing ones. And far from taking resource out of parishes, we're actually trying to put resource into parishes. And so that's where we stand on all of that. And if anybody wants to ask about either of those things, See of Penrith or Maryport and the job share for Archdeacon of Westcumberland, do please, I'd be very happy to try and answer the questions.
I'm from St Mary's Walney. We've been integrated for over a year.
Yeah.
Because of the peace against getting a new victim. So it's quite garlic for something we can't place somewhere else. We're not, I think I'm actually left, but we're still fighting fast. We're going to have another 3 years better getting it. But it does feel that we're sort of getting treated as second-class citizens.
Right, I understand that. I'm afraid that's going to be true all over the diocese where there are vacancies. This was a conscious decision about one parish that where there are very particular needs, if we're talking about Maryport. We're doing our best with Walney, I think. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, Archdeacon.
The answer for Walney is, as you well know, that Barrow Mission PT need to look at their vision for mission and ministry. And once they've done that, then we will be able to put an extra stipendary post into Barrow. We will fill that post. So we're going through due process on the ground. And it's up to Mission PT to speed up.
No, very significant question. Thank you for asking it. Yes, Tudor.
Just a practical question. Will Stuart continue in Moorland as well?
No, he will cease to operate in Moorland and will move house and be working on the West Coast. The back, Charles.
Bishop, can I just welcome what we've said and the way in which you picked up on much of the concerns that were voiced at the last online synod about the See of Penrith?
Yes.
As regards the New Start team, I do welcome that innovative approach to ministry, but 2 people doing what was 3 jobs is a increase in workload, and I hope Stephen Linus will be able to look at the Archdeacon's workloads there as part of his review, so we don't end up burning up 2 people
Good point. Thank you very much indeed. Andrew.
It's just a comment really about it was just a comment about, in a sense, I do welcome the announcement about the start team because as being from the West Coast, I know what it can be like to recruit there. I suppose my only question is that obviously this decision's been taken by the bishop and the staff team, and I just wonder about how these decisions are communicated, because I'm a member of the Bishop's Council as well as the Diocesan Synod, and that isn't to disagree with the fact that this has happened, but in terms of the channels of how we learn about it, because obviously this is quite a fundamental shift in terms of how we're thinking about ministry in the Diocese of Carlisle.
That's also a very good point, and I think I would hold my hand up and say we haven't got the process very well worked out on this particular one, and I'm sorry about that. And normally we would have done something about it. There were various other factors that I can't really go into now which affected the way it all came about. So thank you for raising it. Okay, well, I think that's all under matters arising. So we can move on to the next item, which is the Diocesan Vision, God for All. I hope, if I can speak fast enough in what I want to say about it, there may be an opportunity for people just to chat to each other for a moment or two before we move on to the next item about your experience of God for All thus far. But if I can just say where we're at with God for All at the moment, those who've been around for many years will be familiar with a series of initiatives that have taken place. Certainly while I've been here since 2002, we started off with the Healthy Churches exercise. Some of you may recall churches looking at what they exist to be and to do. Then we went on to From Survival to Revival, which I remember most for the way in which people got it the wrong way around and said from revival to survival, which wasn't quite what we had in mind. And then we had Growing Disciples and the Green Booklet, the famous Green Booklet, which morphed ultimately into God for All, with its very strong emphasis on evangelism. And now, retaining the God for All title, we are into God for All Refresh, looking at the next 5 years. And the Refresh story so far is that we've had a period of consultation, kept the overall title the same, God for All, which we think sort of says what we need to say. Again, going back to what Andrew was saying right at the very beginning of the morning. It's all about God's kingdom coming in Cumbria. And the refreshed God for All vision has 4 themes. I mentioned 2 of them in that brief address. The 4 themes are follow daily, that's all about discipleship, and that's really a continuation of picking up of the Growing Disciples time that we had. Care deeply, which is all about pastoral care and fellowship, which, as I was trying to indicate in the address, is pretty fundamental to everything else, because without it, everything that we do and say lacks integrity. Speak boldly, which is about witness and evangelism and helping people to tell their story, given that all of us have a story about the way in which God has been at work in our lives. And interestingly, other people are fascinated to hear about that. And tread gently, which is our environmental concern and the whole business of how we do something in our own way, small way, about what's happening with climate change and so on. The adverbs of those follow daily, care deeply, speak boldly and tread gently are interchangeable, as you'll probably notice. So you could do any of those in any of those ways. But we feel those are pretty significant themes. They're all very important, and they interrelate and interact. And this ties in, interestingly, very closely with the Church of England's overall vision. Now, that's not altogether surprising, because Emma was actually very involved with determining that as well, and there's been quite an overlap between the two processes. But the Church of England's vision is for a Jesus-centred church, which will be simpler, humbler, and bolder. I mentioned that earlier on. And it has three main streams. One is that the church should become younger and more diverse. And one of the ways in which we're sort of engaging with that is through our Deanery network youth churches. One is that there should be a mixed ecology, by which is meant that there should be churches as we're used to churches, and also fresh expressions of church. Now, I think on that front, we're doing quite well here in Cumbria, in that we have getting on for 350 so-called time-honoured churches, Anglican ones, and we have more than 150 fresh expressions certified, as it were, by the church army as genuine fresh expressions, and up to 3,000 people now involved in fresh expressions of one sort or another. So we are very much a mixed ecology, and we're not saying, as some say, time-honoured church is dead, it's all about fresh expressions, nor are we saying fresh expressions is no use, what we need to do is do what we've always been doing, but do it better. We're not saying either of those things. We're saying both of these really matter and are important. And through fresh expressions particularly, we're managing to reach a number of people quite a large number of people who otherwise we would have had little or no contact with. And part of our intention here in Cumbria is to make sure that there's better integration between what's going on in our time-honoured churches and what is going on in the fresh expressions, so that they're not separate. And the third strand of the national vision is missionary discipleship. Well, that's what we're all about, and that's what our four themes are all about. So I think we're very much on track there, and it's what our mission communities are intended to be about and to do. And I'm engaged in a number of discussions at the moment with people from the Central Church and the Church Commissioners as they look at how our vision and strategy relates to the Church of England's. And actually, we got to the end of an hour's discussion last week about this, and the person who was doing it was so interested by what's happening here. She said, can we have another hour, because we've only just begun to scratch the surface. And interestingly, she was particularly interested by what's happening ecumenically here, not least because the implementation of our God for All vision is through our ecumenical mission communities, each with mission at its heart, together with worship, and working together rather than apart. Now, mission communities have developed very well. We've got around 30, I think, at the moment, around the county. Most of our churches are a mission community of one sort or another. And there is a strong ecumenical dimension where that's happening. Decisions, and I've written about this just very recently, about sexuality by the United Reformed Church and the Methodists are presenting an interesting thing for discussion and engagement with all of us. And we've got our own discussions of living in love and faith coming up. We'll be involved in that. Our parishes will be involved in that. Our deaneries will be involved in that. And there'll probably be future debates and decisions in General Synod, most likely within the next 18 months. So I don't want to preempt that whole process now, but I'm well aware of the fact that the next year or two will involve all sorts of very important conversations which will have implications for our ecumenical engagement. And we all need to be aware of that. Well, next steps. I think the next steps with God for All and our ecumenical vision are fleshing out the 4 themes. Follow daily, care deeply, speak boldly, tread gently. Great, they sound good, but we need a picture or pictures of what sort of church we hope to see in the future, what sort of church God is leading us towards. And we need some so-called KPIs, key performance indicators, some specific ideas and objectives under each of those 4 headings, rather like we had under the 5 marks of discipleship when we were doing our growing disciples thing. And so that is being attended to by the strategy group, which exists ecumenically and consists of the leaders of our 4 partner denominations, plus some different churches together in Cumbria, and will involve a great deal of wide consultation, further consultation within our parishes and mission communities, because we're so conscious of the fact that ownership is vital. And I'm hoping to go round early next year, in the new year, to promote and explain and try to motivate people about all of this insofar as that is possible. And I think I'll be able to do that before we've finally fixed on all the exact points that we want to make under each of our headings. And I must say, I'm really excited about this. I think I do feel we're heading in a good and right direction. And I pray that all of this will indeed help the church as well as the kingdom of God to grow. But even if it doesn't, I believe that we will be doing our best to be obedient to God's will and where He's taking us. So perhaps for the next 10 minutes or so, you might like to gather yourselves into little groups of 3 or 4 and simply talk a little about your experience of God for All and mission communities thus far. Mission communities, I must remind you, are not an end in themselves. They are a means to an end. The idea is they have mission firmly at their heart, a strategy for mission in each mission community, and that they get on with that mission together rather than individually or in silos. So God for All, what's your feeling about A, what has already been happening, and B, what I've just said? If you'd like to form yourselves into little groups of however many you want, really, 3, 4, and have a little conversation. If I can call your conversations to a halt, which I'm sorry to do because they're obviously very animated and lively. And there will be an email address going up on the screen if you wish to send in any comments that you feel are appropriate so for the perusal of people who are continuing to look at and develop the strategy. But we have got time for at least a couple of observations of anything that may have struck people as particularly significant that you'd like everybody else to hear, something you said or something somebody else said in your group, if anybody would like to. Stephen, do you want to come and use the microphone? Yeah.
I'm Stephen Wright from the parish of Mungraisdale, and I'm here but as a nominee. Thank you for Bishop James. I'm pretty much on the margins of the church, was very much alienated from Christianity for 40 years and only began to drift back about 10 years ago. But the specific reason why God for All appealed to me was that it's so inclusive a name, such an inclusive title. And it enabled me both to participate in the church, having had a long appearance of exclusion from it for many reasons. But what it also links with your sermon this morning, in that what I liked about an aspect of the church is doing something with faith. And for me, how God for All has manifested this past couple of years, first of all as a nurse in my background, feeling rather brassed off by the clap for carers stuff. Because part of me said, yeah, can we please do something with all these people who have experienced immense distress these past few years? So we set up the Caring for the Carers project. And I wanted our church, the Christian church, to be doing something practical for carers. And so we've used, with a lot of support, Rydal Hall and done a fundraising campaign. We've had the first 20 carers, nurses, doctors, support workers and others from hospital and community having free holidays. They don't have to be Christians, nor will they attempt to make them one, but they've been looked after for 3 nights and 4 days in a beautiful surrounding and be well fed and been taken care of. So that was the first element of it, was actually doing something practical as a church for those people who were in need, washing feet. The second element would be, some years ago, I was just saying to our small group, in a sense, I'm not interested in Christians. I'm not interested in people who are already hard-boiled in their faith and very comfortable. So we set up the Kentigern School for Contemplatives. And what's drawn is people who are very much on the margins of faith, as well as those who are involved in it, who are longing for a deeper relationship with Christ and with God. And I think the school now in its 3rd year is providing that. And the third area for me is a more personal one, being part because of my nursing background, is finding a way into my local community through the church, offering pastoral support to those who are sick or dying, and latterly, of course, with the pandemic, people coming to me for guidance on how to handle infection control and so forth. For that, for me, is how God for All has spoken to me and affected me in my life. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you very much indeed. And I'm so glad you mentioned particularly the Caring for the Carers thing, which has been absolutely fantastic and entirely due to Stephen that it's come about. Anybody else wish to mention anything? Right, well, if you want to pass on any comments, questions, anything at all, really, do use the, I can't see, I haven't got eyes in the back of my head, so I don't know whether the thing is there or not, but yes, it is, thank you. Do send them in. We will be talking about all this a great deal more in the months to come, so don't worry, this is not your last opportunity by a long chalk. Next item on the agenda is board and committee elections, including the appointment of St Monica and St Mary Charity Trustees. Derek is introducing this.
Okay, you've had 2 papers on this. One sets out a description of the various boards and committees to which people need to be elected for the coming 3 years, and the other paper explains who the electorate is for each of these boards and committees, and how many people can be nominated and elected to them. And this is a set of committees. I won't go into the detail of sort of describing them, but it's a set of committees, each of which has a specific role within the way the diocese operates. The nomination process is open at the moment, as you should all be aware. If you're thinking of standing for one of these positions, please make sure that the people who you ask to nominate you can nominate you. So in some case, and the rules are different for each committee. So quite often, lay people can only be nominated by lay people, and quite often, people can only be nominated by members of Diocesan Synod. So to avoid a frantic scrabble in the last few days, where we receive nominations from, I don't know, members of the clergy who want to be on Bishop's Council and have managed to be nominated by lay people and then have to be told, actually, sorry, it doesn't work like that. Please check that you get the right nominees. The only committee to which I want to draw your attention, with the blessing of Bishop James, is the Vacancy and See Committee. So I've stood up here on a couple of occasions at previous first synods when these committees have been elected and said, well, of course, this is one which we're not expecting will have to operate. However, we have to have a Vacancy and See Committee in case the bishop goes under a bus. But I think there's a fairly strong likelihood that within the lifetime of this synod, we will be looking for a new diocesan bishop. And I don't think I'm saying anything that people aren't aware of.
Just wondering which bus he's going to push me under. I do have a preference.
Be the open-topped one that goes through the lakes. So the Vacancy and See Committee, almost certainly this round of sessions of Synod will have to operate. And particularly on that committee, the Bishop's Council has approved a change to the composition of that committee because we were struggling to actually have a constitution which enabled enough people to be appointed to it to achieve the minimum number that's required in law. So you'll see from your paper that Vacancy and See Committee, we need to elect no fewer than 3 clerks in holy orders and no fewer than 6 lay people. So that's a substantial increase from the previous number of elected members of the Vacancy and See Committee, which was 2 lay and 2 clergy. So that's quite an important one to bear in mind. Has anybody got any questions on the committees? Great. So if I just move on to the St Monica and Mary charity. Sorry, Chris.
Do you want to just give people a reminder of when the nomination period?
I knew someone was going to ask me that, and I haven't got the date on the paper because it went out with the letter. Oh, it's Kim's got it. Yeah, so the timetable says presentation at Synod, Saturday the 9th of October. Well, that's this. Nomination papers to be returned by email or post by Thursday the 14th. So that's this coming Thursday. Voting papers and biographies will then go out on the 22nd, and we'll have the votes back in by the 8th of November. So Thursday this coming week is the key date by which you need to get your nominations in. We're quite happy to accept nomination papers that are emailed, and if you can't get all the signatures together on one nomination form, we're happy to receive emails from people who are nominating and people in seconding, and we'll put them all together. So you don't need to worry about getting a physical signature on a piece of paper by Thursday, as long as you do that at some point. So the St Monica charity point, the reason this comes to this meeting is because the managing trustees of the charity are appointed by the Synod, so we have to ask Synod to appoint them. This is a charity which gives small but fairly significant grants to single parents who are in need. It does some fantastic work. When I see the applications that come in, I'm really moved by the need that's expressed. So we have 3 trustees at the moment who are standing to be reappointed there, Wendy Houghton, Lucy Lunn and Angela Whittaker. They'll probably be joined by a 4th fairly soon, but I would like you to confirm that you're happy for those 3 to be appointed again as trustees. And if anyone has any specific questions on the work of the charity, Angela's here, I think, so maybe call Angela at lunchtime, unless you need to know before we appoint the trustees when it does. So can I ask for a show of hands on that, if people are happy to appoint those? Great, thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Derek. And these committees, they do matter, and it also matters that we get the right people on them. So do take that aspect of the whole thing seriously. Bishop's Council report from May. This is paper D. We're simply receiving that. if you've had a chance to look at it. Anybody want to raise any questions or issues? That's great. In which case we can go on to the General Synod report. It was to have been presented by Stuart Fife. He can't be here, so Cameron will do it for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, General Synod met online in July. It's great sadness because it was lovely going to the University of York, and so that didn't happen. But the Synod did meet and was closed, and so the existing members of the General Synod no longer members of General Synod, and as you know, there are several people, and there's several people in this room standing for election to the General Synod, so we wait to see what will happen about that. I decided not to stand again, and those who are members of the House of Clergy have very kindly co-opted me onto the House of Clergy at the beginning of this meeting because I stood down from the General Synod, I had no right to be here. And despite the fact that, as our Diocesan Registrar will confirm, that at the moment I have 7 individual licenses here in the diocese, I think I have more individual licenses than anybody else. None of them confirm my membership of the House of Clergy. So thank you very much for co-opting me onto the Synod. So I'm allowed to speak to you, but no longer member of the General Synod, and my good wishes go to all those who are elected for what will be really quite a busy and major group of sessions going forward for the Synod. So will be very difficult, but quite busy as well. You've had the document, don't really feel I won't say anything about that, but if anybody has any question about the General Synod, now is the time to ask it. Excellent, well thank you very much, and despite the fact that I thought I'd finished with the General Synod, I'm definitely finished with the General Synod now, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Cameron. And I have to say, I mean, General Synod, for those who are standing and those who may be elected, is a very interesting experience in all sorts of ways. It has its moments, it has its rather boring moments as well as its very exciting moments, but one of the best things about it is the opportunity to meet up with all the other members of Synod and rekindle existing friendships and make new ones, and discover what's going on in other parts of the church helps us to have a sense of being a part of the wider Church of England. And you'll have seen some of the things that have already been discussed, and as we've already indicated, there will be a lot of things coming up in the next quinquennium which are of real significance and importance for the future life of the Church and our ecumenical relationships. The next item is the annual report of the Board of Education. Vanessa Odia, who's our Director of Education, can't be here, but Andrew, who is Chair of the Board, is here. And Andrew, I know you're willing to answer questions people may have. Would you like to introduce the report as well? Thank you very much.
I'm sure everyone's read every word, but if you wanted the 2-minute summary, here it is. Our vision is to be church schools for all, for Jesus' sake, distinctly Christian, serving the common good. The DBE has oversight of about 1/3 of the schools in Cumbria, not 1/3 of the pupils, because many of our schools are smaller, rural primary schools. In the last 18 months, the team have worked extraordinarily hard. One of our long-serving head teachers I met with just last week, and she said to me, of all the teams she's known in the diocese, DBE teams, all of which have been strong, she considers we currently have the best she's ever known. So I went home and emailed them and told them. That's great encouragement, isn't it? Particularly Vanessa coming into a very new role to her and into a context that none of us have any experience in. So that's very encouraging. You'll have seen all sorts of research around mental health and the different groups of people whose mental health has been most affected or most under pressure in these last 18 months, the pressure on teenagers, the pressure on caregivers and so on. I saw one poll that said the 3 most stressful roles in lockdown were politicians, clergy and school leaders. So our education team have done a wonderful, wonderful job. The heads huddles referenced on the executive summary has been bringing school heads together to help them share experiences and sort of pastor each other. They've been absolute lifelines. And we get emails from heads saying, I just simply don't know what I would have done without that time with other heads. So the DBE, I take no credit for any of this because it's all been done by Vanessa and Charlotte and Morven and Dorothy, have done a wonderful job. But it's worth Synod being really clear of the new landscape into which we are coming. And again, it's referenced there clearly in the report, both on that executive summary and a few pages later. In my copy, it's page 9, under Academies and Multi-Academy Trusts. We're coming into a new landscape. We were expecting a speech to be given in about 2 weeks' time, saying everybody has to join a supportive mat. Now, we have some issues in Cumbria relating nationally. To give you, for example, James and I and a few of us were at a meeting in Cumbria, I think about 5 years ago now, where a national expert came to talk about schools, and they made reference to small schools. One of the head teachers put their hand up. What do you mean by a small school? Well, nationally, small schools means under 200. They made the mistake of saying this in front of all the DBE heads, and to say they lost the room would be a significant understatement. Because when we talk about small schools, I'm thinking about a school I visited a fortnight ago with 22 pupils, and it's not our smallest. So we're in a new landscape in terms of relationships to multi-academy trusts. We're in a specific landscape of being Cumbria and those lovely, wonderful, small community schools. We have a small DBE team of 4 people, and we expect a drop in numbers in Cumbrian schools. Best current estimate in the next 5 years is a 15%, 15% drop in child numbers. We have a 5-year run-in, if you like, to know approximately how many children we expect to be 5 years old in 5 years' time. So those are fairly clear numbers. We don't expect them to change unless the whole country moves to Cumbria. So we've got that to navigate. There's a change in the role of the local authority, but they'll be aware of that 15% drop. They'll also be aware of their likely change in what they'll be doing and what they'll be able to do between now and 2025. So we're having a big consultation with our heads at the moment, and we face leading into a very new environment. Now, if anybody here has had experience of leading into mission communities, they will have absolute sympathy and empathy and expertise to bring to what we are facing as a DBE. All the great opportunities and all the real complexities. So it's important to Synod to know, therefore, that it's been a wonderful time of a lot of hard work by the Board of Education to support our heads, and it's been really well appreciated. But we do come into this new landscape. James and I are very clear that we have the Good Shepherd Trust, and we need to ensure that that is financially and relationally viable. That's one mat. But we're also really clear, both from the Department of Education and from Church of England nationally, and just knowledge on the ground, that one mat simply won't be enough to serve in a personal, relational, contextual way all of our schools. And Synod just needs to be aware that that's what we're walking into. I'm happy to take general questions. If there are specific technical questions, I may well delegate them to my team and promise you an answer within a week by email.
I'm so glad you said the team. As you pointed at me, I thought, crikey, probably not. Great. So any questions to Andrew about the report or anything he's just said? Vital part of our mission. Tudor?
So the question was, when your schools ask you what should we do in terms of maths, are there plans for future maths run by the diocese? The first thing to encourage them to do is to fill out the really brief questionnaire we sent around to all our heads 3 weeks ago, which is a temperature-taking exercise. The second thing to do, I think, is have a good conversation with your governing bodies. But we have written to all the heads, setting out at least 4 possibilities for how we think the next few years could go. And we carefully haven't graded them in our preferences. We're clear that the diocesan relationship is a really key one, that there is something wonderful and life-giving that Christianity offers. So we're passionate about schools that are distinctively Christian, that serve the common good. And one of the great opportunities, I think, coming down the track is that if local clusters include both church schools and non-church schools, and some of those will be VA and VC, and there are some complexities there, there's a great opportunity to deepen our relationship with churches who are not currently anywhere near the DBE family. So I think the first thing to do is to ask them to fill in that questionnaire, which won't take long at all and will come to us for our understanding of the temperature. If they've got specific questions, they're really welcome to connect with either Vanessa or Charlotte. Charlotte, at the moment, is leading on that. And once we've got a sense of the temperature, then we'll be able to answer more specifically. We're passionate that whatever the solutions, they must work locally and they must serve the best interests of the children. And that cuts through quite a lot when it comes down to it. Chris?
Yeah, it's just the structure that the main people here are not familiar with what a mat is. So you might actually want to say.
Oh, sorry, a mat. I do apologise. I just read a book on submarining, submariners, and it had a very useful set of acronyms at the beginning, which I had to turn back to all the time. A MAT is a multi-academy trust. And if you've not heard of one of those, I'd love you to shake my hand afterwards, and I'm very, very happy for you. But multi-academy trusts, I'm thrilled on your behalf. Multi-academy trusts is the way that education is going. And there are great opportunities for that in terms of more explicit community ownership and involvement with our schools. There are great opportunities, but it's a significant transformation. I think that when the books are written, the last decade or so and the coming 5 years will be seen as significant as the 1940s and 50s in terms of the educational landscape, and potentially more so. And those of us who know William Temple's theology behind both the creation of the NHS and the creation of church and schools in that post-Second World War period, well, that was hugely significant for our country, and we're in that type of transformation season right now, which is why I said both opportunities and complexities.
Andrew?
I just want to commend what Andrew said about the work of the Board of Education and especially the team in the Diocese of Charlotte and Vanessa. I'm a governor of 4 church women's schools, 3 in my parishes and 1 because I was asked to do it. I've appointed, well, I haven't personally, but one of my governing bodies has appointed a new head teacher for this academic year, and we're very, very ably supported by the education department. And equally, I can speak for all of the 3 schools in my parishes that they speak very, very highly of the current team in the education department in terms of their cordial and encouraging and helpful relationships, particularly as schools get to grips with looking at vision and a new science framework, which rather changes the game both on a sort of local level as well as looking at the academy level. One thing I would say about the educational landscape is that I pick up quite a lot of suspicion and fear about academisation and about multi-academy trusts and perhaps about the Good Shepherd, Matt, which I think is unfounded, but I think it is one of the ways forward, especially if it becomes accelerated policy from the government and the push towards this, as is likely to be the case, that there needs to be a sort of relationship building exercise with the idea of that this doesn't necessarily have to be anything to be afraid of.
I mean, those of us who are vicars or members of PCCs will be entirely unfamiliar with people getting totally the wrong end of the stick from anything We say, wouldn't we, Andrew? No, really helpful. So 2 little things on that. Number one, off the back of this consultation that I just referenced in my answer to Tudor, we will be writing back with some simple FAQ answers because it's been so helpful. We've had some wonderful responses and some really brutal honesty, which is great, absolutely what we want. So we can go back and say sorry for some things. We can go back and clarify some things, and we will be doing that in the next few weeks as we get more things in. But secondly, to say, we're not a political body. We operate in a political environment, but we do so non-politically. So I am slightly nervous that there are those with a desire to wait out the multi-academy trust juggernaut and hope for different things in 2025, which of course might be 2030 and so on. We don't take any view on politics. In fact, as believers, we submit to our authorities, don't we? And so this is in front of us, and we're seeking to honour that in a Christian, proactive way. But it's got to work in the local context. That's our test, and we're explicit on that. And every time I say that, the governing bodies and the head teachers go, oh, phew, because that's the test. We're all in it for the good of the children, aren't we? I hope that's helpful.
Any last question or comment before lunch?
That'll stop them.
Right. Well, I think before Andrew leaves the podium, I would like to say a huge thank you to him for his chairing of the board. Which is not an easy task at the moment, as he's indicated. Education's going through monumental changes at the moment, and in many ways the MAT that he's referring to, the Good Shepherd MAT, Multi-Academy Trust, has taken over where local authorities left off. And a lot of the work that local authorities used to do is now done by the MATs. And MATs need a certain number of schools, but particularly of pupils, in order to exist and to be financially viable. And that's, like so many things in Cumbria, one of our problems, that we've got quite a number of schools now belonging to the MAT, but because they're all quite small, we haven't got a huge number of pupils. But also, as well as thanking Andrew and all the members of the board, as he mentioned, the DBE team, Vanessa, who's director, Charlotte, who's the deputy director, and then Morven and Dorothy, who do a lot of the background work, have really done a fantastic job during the whole of the pandemic, with huge strains and pressures. And I know from conversations that I've had in various schools that the staff have really appreciated all their efforts. And so perhaps we can give them a clap, even though they're not here as well. Thank you, Andrew, very much indeed. We're going on to lunch now.
I think, looking round, most of you have been on the Diocesan Synod before, but in case there are new members, could you please indicate how many of you are actually here for the first time? Oh, right. In that case, those who have been here before, please just forgive me. I'm going to give a couple of minutes background to what we're about. The Diocesan Board of Finance doesn't just tot up the figures and do the accounts. It's got a lot of responsibilities. It is the legal employer of all the lay staff in the diocese, and it acts as the employment department, HR department, for the clerical staff who are under different arrangements but still need to have reference to professional advice. So it basically is the HR department for everybody who works in the diocese. It maintains a large property portfolio of parsonages, and it also has the responsibility to look after redundant churches. And unfortunately, we're starting to see more and more of that as the years are going on, where churches are closing and parishes are combining with other places, or indeed finding different places to do their worship. So it's also the very much closely linked with the Bishop's Council, and that union translates into the Diocesan Synod, because with the Bishop's Council, the role of the DBF is to align the financial strategies that we adopt in terms of management of our assets and our finances with the spiritual mission aspirations and policies of the diocese. Our role, therefore, in a nutshell, is to maximize as much income as we can, most of which comes from the parishes, but there is a significant gap. And with the maximum promotion and deployment of missionary staff. Now, they can be paid, they can be unpaid, they can be ordained, they can be lay, but they are a resource, an HR resource for the promotion of the Gospels and mission. And I think Andrew's going to give me a replacement machine here, so obviously you're under oral stress. Does that now work? Yeah.
It's coming through that.
Right. So when we come to you with budgets, as we are about to do, the background to that is that there is an agreement with Bishop's Council that this diocese, and in differing from other dioceses who are in deep financial issue, this diocese will attempt to break even on an annual basis in order to sustain its viability for the longer term future. What we try to do is we try to really reorganize our non-people assets in order to produce a better return than they are currently producing by selling surplus houses, by getting out of land, farms, whatever we happen to have inherited from the past, and reinvesting them through CCLA, our investment managers, into reliable investments. ESG is the term that goes around at the moment. Things that are acceptable, but do produce a reliable and ongoing return, which is much better than the income that we're currently getting from those assets that we're trying to sell. And also hoping that the lion's share of the money which has historically come from parish offer will continue to be sustained. But the reality is that it hasn't been the case over several years, the last 10 years, 13 indeed. The buying power of the parish offer has gone down by 50%. And that gap, somehow or other, has to be made up. And it's been made up, can't be fully made up through other income from the diocese. It has been made up per force by a reduction in the paid ministry, which, with the policy of mission communities and God for All, the idea is that the gaps will, in part or as much as they can be, made up by more outgoing response from the lay in terms of sharing the burden of mission and ministry. Now that's the diocese policy which is endorsed by Diocesan Synod in the past, which prevails at the moment through the Bishop's Council, and we bring figures as a DBF to the Bishop's Council and then to you, which reflect the optimum allocation of the money that we think is going to be available in accordance with the spiritual objectives of the diocese. So that's why we're here. Now, the existing Diocesan Board of Finance, which carries on until the 31st of December this year, but you're about to elect a new one, has a mix of skills. We have a skills audit. We look and see who we need, or the skills that we need to make a balance of expertise. Management expertise, financial expertise, HR expertise, communication, that sort of thing. And also a spiritual conviction that what we're about is worthwhile. So we do have the power to co-opt. And if through the election process it happens that we will have gaps in the skills that we do know we need and have had in the past, we can co-opt up to 4 people onto our board. And we have done. So it isn't the end of the day. If we get an ineffective DBF, we can and that's with respect, because they may not have the skills that we need, we can actually enhance the skills through co-option, through identification. And other people who haven't been elected may well think they have those skills, and the diocesan website will explain what we need, if we do, when we do. So that's the DBF in a nutshell. Now, that's the end of Chairman's remarks, really, because other than to say that as a diocese, if you call it success, we have actually managed over the years, over a 5-year period, to balance our books. And we see that as a success. Others may claim that we ought to spend down capital, and that's in accordance with biblical teachings, grain in barns, etc., etc. We want to stay in business. Therefore, we think that dioceses should be sufficiently structured and inspired to be self-maintaining financially. And at the moment, we can say that we are. Many dioceses can't, and they're in deep trouble. We give thanks for what we've got, but we're conscious of the fact that it stays brittle. So the budget you will have, and Derek and Rick will explain in more detail how we got to where we have in the figures that you've got in front of you. That evidence is continued frugality, but nevertheless virtually a break-even position for 2022, but for 2023 continuing problems remain, unless, of course, the main source of income, which is parish offer, revives through faith reviving and money coming in from the general people in the parishes and beyond. So that's enough for that. Let's get to the agenda. You have the minutes of the Diocesan Board of Finance in the Diocesan Synod, and you are all members of the Diocesan Board of Finance. You're like shareholders, but like shareholders, you don't have responsibility for the management other than for approving in principle the things that we bring to you in terms of our governance. But you don't have a responsibility for financial loss either. So it's a nominal relationship, but you do elect the board, the committee, the trustees, the directors. We are a registered charity and we are a limited company. So we have to observe both those sets of laws. And you are the body who manages whether you think we've done a good job or not, and if you don't, kick us off, and that's your power. So those minutes at the last synod, which was done virtually, can I propose that they be adopted? And everybody is in favour or not? Any against? None against, so they're approved. Then, as a matter of communication, the minutes of the committee, when they meet as directors and trustees, you get them, you have them now. We meet every couple of months. We also have a property subcommittee and we have an investment subcommittee. And the essence of those meetings is built into the minutes of the board committee that you have in front of you. So you get to know all of our deliberations as they have happened every 2 months. We did have a meeting in September, but we haven't yet met to approve those meetings, those minutes, so therefore you don't have them yet. But those two, we ask you to receive them. Do you receive them? Thank you. And then formal approval of the diocesan budget, and you do have a paper which explains the background to the preparation of the comprehensive figures that you do have in front of you. And in essence, for 2022, you've got an expenditure of 7.7 million, and you've got income of approximately the same amount. That's what we hope will happen, based on the assumptions that Derek and Rick will no doubt explain now. Thank you. Do you want to come here? You've got one, right. You can tell I'm really okay with this.
Can people hear me okay on this one? Sure. Okay, so the issue for consideration now is setting the budget for 2022. The recommendation is that you, sitting as the Board of Finance, approve the budget and note the work to be undertaken in the remainder of 2021 and 22 to promote a more sustainable diocesan position in the future. And there's a specific resolution, which is that the expenditure and contributions proposed in the budget for 22 are approved. Now, in terms of the context, I'm sure you'll recollect that 2021 was quite a tough year in terms of setting the budget. Coming on the back of COVID, we were setting the budget for 21 in the middle of COVID, and that you'll recall also, I think, those people who were involved in the process, that required us to make some pretty tough decisions, particularly around staffing, particularly around Church House, and I don't think it would be going too far to say that we've cut to the bone to protect frontline local ministry. And as Jim said, in the short term, that's proved to be a successful financial fix, and we came through last year and we've come through the first 3 quarters of this year in a better financial position than most dioceses, which, if I'm honest, isn't saying a lot. I saw a figure yesterday which said that for 2022, the dioceses in the Church of England collectively are budgeting for a loss of £44 million. And there are 42 dioceses in the Church of England. So it doesn't take much maths to work out that if we're not, that leaves 41 dioceses budgeting a collective loss of 44 million. So on average, dioceses in the Church of England are budgeting to lose £1 million in the course of the year ahead. And I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, because I think it's one of those things where we should be pleased with where we are relative to other people, but we shouldn't be particularly happy about where we are, full stop. The 2022 budget, as always, is based on a set of assumptions. We've taken the assumptions for 2021 and then updated those on the basis of what's happened in the real world and what our known future requirements and expectations should be. The key expenditure and income assumptions are set out in the paper, and the ones I draw your attention to particularly are on the expenditure side. We come up with a balanced budget because, in spite of prioritising resource for frontline ministry, we are still making small numbers of reductions to stipend in-house for duty posts. The second key point on the expenditure side is the budget contains a 1% increase in stipends and a 1% increase in employees' salaries. The stipend increase is in line with national expectations, so we're on a par with other dioceses with that. We could have quite a big debate to think about the cost of living, which is really on people's minds at the moment, but the 1% figure is intended to be the best we can do in the circumstances, maybe not as generous as we would like to be, but then every extra bit of generosity on the stipend or salary has to be paid for from somewhere. Rick and I were ecstatic to be just about putting the draft budget to bed when we got the news of the 1.25 percentage point increase on national insurance, but the draft budget does take that into account, so we've covered that. The expenditure side of the budget is based on the requirement for the Bishop's leadership team to manage the payroll budget within a constraint. So in other words, bishops and archdeacons will have to think carefully and monitor the budget position carefully before making decisions about appointments as the year unfolds. That's exactly the same as we've done this year, and it's had an impact, but I don't think it's had an unbearable impact. The alternative would be to have to try to find more savings in other areas. And then the final point on the expenditure side, which is a real positive, is that after 2 years where we've spent nothing in terms of capital improvements to vicarages, I don't mean maintenance but capital improvements, so the work we do to try to keep the building stock up to sort of current expectations of what good quality housing should be like. We've reinstated the housing capital budget for 2022, so there's £60,000 in there to pay for the things like full refurbishment of kitchens, creating shower rooms in houses that don't have them, if we're purchasing a property to put in an office in the garage or whatever. So we've reinstated that part of the budget, so that's quite a positive bit of news. And then assumptions on the income side, we're assuming that houses we don't need, we will sell, and that we'll continue to progress that, which has been part of our long-term financial strategy, because if we have a house that we're really honestly not going to need in the future, we don't want to be sitting on it, spending money on the maintenance of it, managing tenants in it, etc. We want to sell those properties because we can then take the capital receipt, we can invest it, and we'll get an income of whatever percent every year forever if we do that. So we will be expecting to keep selling property that we don't need. And then the other key factor on income, as Jim says, this is the most significant part of the income. The offer towards the cost of local ministries from mission communities and parishes is based on the actual offers that have been submitted. And the figure there is about 12%, or about £500,000 less than the offers that were being made pre-COVID. So we're fractionally up on last year, but we're still 12% down on what we were pledged for 2020. And obviously that £500,000 there is the gap that we've closed in order to achieve a balanced budget by a bit of reduction in local ministry, sweating our assets harder, selling assets and investing the sale proceeds, and making big cuts in expenditure other than local ministry expenditure. So if you plug all those in, what you end up with is a balanced budget with expenditure and income of about £7.7 million. So as I've said earlier, and I say in the paper, for 21 and 22, we're doing quite well if you look at those years in isolation in financial terms, but I wouldn't say that that is what you might call a missionally optimal or sustainable position. So to reiterate, in spite of the drastic action we took last year, we can only propose a balanced budget for 2022 by continuing reductions in clergy numbers. And if you project forward beyond 2022, you'll see continued danger of losses unless we keep taking action. So I view this year's budget as a year in isolation, as last year's was, as we were responding to COVID, but also as part of an ongoing long-term piece of work in pursuit of a genuinely sustainable financial position. And I think I've been here 17 years, and I think I've been sort of chasing that goal over the horizon for 17 years, and I think I'm going to carry on chasing it for the next 5 years at least. And what I'm hoping is that by the time I've been here 20 years or 22 years, we will actually have settled on a position where we can say we're genuinely financially sustainable for the long term, rather than just sort of achieving it year by year, but at the same time dying through 1,000 cuts. So you'll see in the paper there's a set of measures which Bishop's Council and the Bishop's staff team have identified to help address the issues into 2022. Some of those will require quite tough conversation, I think. But what I would urge you to do in your mission communities and your parishes is engage in the conversations that are going to happen in the next year and the year after that and the year after that. Because it's through those conversations that we can genuinely get a sort of shared sense of responsibility for the future, and we can achieve the goal for me is a situation where everybody can genuinely say they think there's a partnership between the local church and the episcopacy to achieve sustainability, and that both parties feel they've got a sort of shared sense of responsibility for that. And that's on the back of a situation sort of historically where at times it's felt as if bishops and archdeacons have to propose all sorts of horrible things to make sure we can balance the budget, and the local church feels it's on the receiving end of it. And I'd much rather in a position where collectively we work together to say, how much money can we contribute? How much ministry can we afford with that? How should that ministry be deployed and allocated? So I'd really encourage you to engage in the conversations that will happen around that in the coming months. None of that will be easy, I don't think. None of the decisions that have to be taken in the future will be easy ones to make particularly. But as a starter, at least we are again putting a balanced budget in front of you for 2022. And that is a better position than most parts of the country are in. So I don't know, Jim, whether you want to add anything to that?
I don't want to add anything to that because I think Derek, as ever, has explained things. I think that he's explained things very clearly, fairly bluntly at times, but that's what we're in about. But if you have any questions you'd like to ask, and there are, can I take Chris first?
Yeah, I think a couple of points.
Can everybody hear Chris, or would you prefer him to be on a microphone? Maybe if you stood in the front and talked to the...
Yeah, I think we owe very great gratitude to people who need concerned with this. So Derek and Rick, who have done so much work on this, and also Jim and the committee, because I think they keep doing the marvelous job. The power of balanced budget this year, and it's amazing to have come through last year the way we did. Again, so I think it's really a big thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Chris, and you've preempted my own comments to Derek and Rick, and indeed to the whole of the church house staff. They're a great team. They're behind the scenes. They're often unrecognised, and in some cases, the first place you think of attacking is admin. So get rid of admin and all our financial problems will be solved, and they wouldn't, they really wouldn't. But unsung and unseen, but recognised. So well done, and thanks very much indeed, Chris. Now there was another point. Yes, please.
Thank you. Parishes and mission communities were asked to submit what their giving would be by July. This was before the energy crisis. I'm just wondering, have you had a chance to think about what impact the energy crisis is going to have? Because obviously, heating buildings, all those sorts of things, that's going to hit parishes very high. And obviously, I imagine it will have an impact on diocesan funds as well.
Before Derek answers, this strikes a chord with me, and it's a dangerous one. But I think carbon neutral 2030, I think flexibility as to people not coming to church, but how can we outreach, leads inevitably to the question of the suitability of some of our buildings. And I'll say no more, but energy costs in thermally inefficient buildings has got to find an answer to that. Derek.
I think all I can say on that is that all the parties involved, so parishes and the Board of Finance, typically, need to, the starting point needs to be, how can we absorb this shock? And there's a real dilemma, isn't there? Because the Board of Finance arguably is no better place to absorb the shock than an individual parish. So, if I sat here and said, oh, it'll be okay, the DBF's balanced its budget and it's doing quite well, don't worry, then I'm not saying you turn the heating up and not worry, but I think that the starting point is parishes make their offers. I know they have to make them early in the year, there's lots of provisionality around it. Our starting point is that parishes will meet their offers. If in the course of a year parishes find they can't meet their offers, then we want to know about that and have a conversation about it rather than it just sort of happen unilaterally. And we really want to work with any parish that's got a financial problem in the course of the year to see whether we've either got some expertise we can bring to bear or whether we've got some practice from other parishes that we can share with people. So I absolutely take the point, Simon, that it's a concern, and it's concerning us as well as you.
there isn't an easy answer or way out of it. But if you get to a point where you think, crikey, this is really causing us a financial issue, or we're going to struggle to pay our offer, come and talk to us about it. That's the best I can do, really.
Before I ask Sir Martin, I'm assuming you're all aware of the parish buying network. If not, please have a look at their website. Parishes individually have no negotiating power with power companies, but collectively they do. And the parish buying agency will negotiate with energy companies as a block requirement and can get, and in my own experience have got, significantly better terms, even though those terms may indeed be a lot more than you're currently paying. But you can get into fixed price agreements, and maybe are through them a lot better, I think, than you would individually with the energy companies of your choice. Sir Martin.
Martin Holgate, Appleby Deanery. When the God for All strategy was first produced, it had within it sub-strategies, one for ministry, which has been very considerably explored, but also a strategy for buildings was forecast. And listening to this exchange and thinking about the extra pressures of the target of the 2030 carbon neutrality, isn't it time for the diocese as a whole to start thinking seriously about the longer-term strategy for the buildings, many of which are deeply cherished, not just by church members, but as the most important historic monuments and often visually the dominant buildings in their communities, giving a special extra quality to those communities, and indeed perhaps contributing to bringing something of the 45 million visitors that come to Cumbria every year. This is a wider issue than just the DBF, but shouldn't we be thinking very seriously about this? I know that Archdeacon Richard Pratt has been doing work in this area, but maybe the Synod should ask for the strategy for buildings to be reactivated when the COVID pressures are behind us and brought back here as an important thing to think about. We're considering our long-term future, and last point, how to involve our wider communities who benefit from the existence of church buildings in the upkeep of those buildings, so that the greater part of the resources raised by our parishes for the work of the church can be devoted to ministry and pastoral matters and not building maintenance. Thank you.
Excellent, Sir Martin. Before I take the questioner there, I wonder if Bishop James might like to respond, because that has actually come up at Bishops' Council. The fact that we had a building strategy which maybe needs a bit of reactivation.
Thank you very much. Yes, it certainly does. Thank you very much. It certainly does. We have got the building strategy, you're absolutely right. And to be quite honest, we haven't really implemented it over these years, partly because of everything else that's going on, but partly because it raises so many very, very difficult issues which we don't quite know the answers to. So I think bringing it back here would be a very good idea, and looking for some advice from people as to how we pursue it. I mean, one of the things is actually the ecumenical dimension of building strategy, which is looking at villages where there may be several buildings, church buildings, where really only one is needed, and trying to work out both strategically and from a heritage and tourism and so on point of view, which are the ones that we need to keep and which perhaps we might find other uses for.
If I can be of any personal help in that work, while I'm spared, as they say, I'll be happy.
Thank you very much. And before I go under the bus to I look forward to engaging with this one, because it's one for the whole. I mean, it's not just us in this diocese. Everywhere, the buildings issue is a huge one, and we are very fortunate in having such lovely buildings for the most part in this county, but their cost is monumental, and heating is not an inconsiderable part of that cost. So thank you. Yes, definitely needs to be approached and attacked.
Thank you. The gentleman next to David Dickinson, whose name I can't recall. That's it.
Yes, Tim Barker, Solway Plain Parish. On the question of diocesan-wide action and diocesan-wide problems, including unexpected rises in heating costs, when we were discussing our parish offer earlier this year, one of the things that was pointed out to us was, see, give as much as you can, but be realistic. And it occurred to me, what are we whose Saviour made the storm cease, whose Saviour performed miracles all the time? What are we doing being realistic? And I thought, given the problems we have, we might at least ask for help in the right direction. What we did, discussing our parish offer, was we asked everybody in the parish to put aside a lunchtime just to pray. Not necessarily for money, but that was the basis of it. I'm sure most of us, all of us, know at least one story of people praying for money, for mission, or for some church activity, and receiving it. So that's what we did. One lunchtime we said to each other, well, this day, instead of simply saying grace over our meal, we will ask the Lord to help us in whatever way he thinks best to meet this problem, which is fine in itself. It so happens that in our parish, each of the 7 churches then received a legacy of £2,000. But that aside, I just wonder whether the diocese might set aside a time to ask everybody in the diocese to pray for these matters.
Bishop James, do you wish to respond to that? It seems a sensible suggestion. Val.
Valerie Hallard, Solway Deanery. It sounds a bit mundane after that wonderful exhortation to pray, but I was just going to think it was worth mentioning the sustainability rosette when we're looking at buildings. That it's a model that's being piloted for sustainability, looking across the mission community buildings, and it may be that members of the Diocesan Synod don't all know about it.
I'm sorry, I may have been my hearing, but I couldn't quite determine what the point was. I hope you all heard that, but maybe Derek and Rick did.
I think as part of the work on thinking about buildings, the Churches Trust for Cumbria have developed a thing called the Sustainability Rosette. That's what we're talking about, which is it's the image of a flower and there's the petals, and each petal is one aspect of the sustainability of the church, which is not just about financial issues, is it? It's all about the use of the building, the community engagement, sort of the financial dimension, etc. And you put them all together and you have a flower which represents a sustainable and healthy
church. It's like an organic thing. Is that fair? I think I saw, is it Nigel at the back?
No, it's Charles Home.
Charles Home, okay. Yes.
Sorry, let's further.
Yes, and then you can get the microphone, Charles, and that will be easier. 2 things really. On the sustainability rosette, we want you to do that as part of your overall mission planning, so you look at ministry, mission and buildings together and not as separate strands. That's really important. On praying, Nicky Smith, Director of Ministry, myself, pray and have a half-day fasting on Tuesday. You don't physically meet, you just do prayer and fasting for the diocese on Tuesday. So why don't you join us virtually?
Tuesday, half-day fasting and prayer for the diocese.
And now Charles. Charles, you used to be in the army. I'm sure you don't need that thing.
Those on the loop might need it. Can I make two observations? First of all, buildings. We've got to be careful that we don't see sorting out buildings as the financial panacea for the Board of finances, because the cost of buildings has an indirect effect on people's ability to pay a parish offer. But if we close buildings, the money from proceeds of sale don't go to the Board of Finance or to the local parish. They get caught up in national stuff. Somebody else knows more about that will explain that. But buildings, yes, they're important, yes, they need to be addressed, but they're not the great financial panacea, but they're something we can all talk about till the cows come home and avoid the real issue. Can I ask a question though? 2023, your budget projection is a deficit of 218,000, which equates to approximately 4 stipendiary posts. What provision stroke planning are you making for a balanced budget in 2023?
We deliberately haven't. What we've said is, here's a set of projections, so if we do nothing, that's what we might expect to happen. So there's a whole set of things we can do. What I'm hoping is that we won't be looking at 2023 in isolation, so I'm hoping that we'll be setting a budget that covers 23, 24, 25, 26, maybe 27, maybe 5 years. And we've got from now until probably June when we set the budget to do the work on that. So I wouldn't like to say what the options are at the moment. What we're trying to do by putting the figures in the papers was simply to make clear that thinking the problem is going to solve itself next year because we balance the budget for this year is naive in the extreme. So you've put your finger, Charles, on the point we were trying to make, which is we're going to have to do some more thinking and work next year in order to balance the budget for the future.
Can I ask a follow-up question then to that? When you say we need to do some thinking, which we? Because this is a Board of Finance meeting, not a Bishop's Council meeting. So which we is going to have to plan for the budget 23 to 25? Well, and how is that going to be fully affected?
Then I think, well, if I can stick with the first point that you made first, we are still in a settling down period, we think, but we don't know, from the attacks of COVID and the effects that that's had on cash flows of parishes and therefore the diocese. We don't know whether we're through that yet, and we don't know what the long-term effects of that are going to be. So for the moment, we have deferred what we would otherwise have been able to do, which is the next 5-year plan. We haven't ducked it. We just don't know enough about what the circumstances are going to be where we can reliably put together a vision financially. And then liaise, and this is the second point you make, what the Diocese Board of Finance purpose, function, as I explained in my opening remarks, is we are reactive to the strategies that are determined by the Bishop's Council for mission and ministry in the diocese. We then look at the financial resources that look as if they may be available, and we come back with proposals to Bishop's Council as to how they might translate financially. And then there's a toing and froing exercise. That's the theory. Now, how much it works in practice depends on how much engagement takes place by the people on those groups, and how much further engagement through the archdeacons and the archdeaconries and then the deaneries may well take place in addition. So the consultation period for a 5-year plan, and I think Derek will endorse this, is quite extensive, but it has to start somewhere. And it will start by the Bishop's Council reiterating or changing their priorities, their strategic priorities. Us putting together some figures at the DBF that might fit or that don't fit by a long way, and then a filtering process. It is not up to the Diocesan Board of Finance to decide on that filtering process. We are reactive, but at the same time we're responsible for coming to you with something that looks reasonable, which we think you can approve. And ultimately, it's the Diocesan Synod that either signs off or doesn't sign off and say, go home and do your homework again. What comes to you? Because you are effectively the House of Commons here. The Bishop may wish to add to the process in macro but otherwise I'm assuming that I've got it right. Thank goodness. Charles, does that help or does that not help?
It does help, and it's great to have some clarity on that process, though I do wonder whether having such a separation between Bishop's Council and the budget setting role of the Board of Finance, whether then that needs to be much more integrated rather than separated.
In some respects, it already is integrated.
Oh, no.
Yeah, as a member of Bishop's Council, I'm sure you'll know, there is a commonality of membership. There are quite a few members of the Bishop's Council and the Diocesan Board of Finance, mainly through ex officio relationships, but not exclusively so. So we do get to see what each other's up to as each other is doing what each other is, which tends to lead to quite an effective sharing of the balance between mission and finance objectives and the marrying of them as much as we can. But at the end of the day, if things don't balance, then the diocese has to take a decision. Are we going to dive into reserves and prejudice the future to keep the sustainable or the unsustainable present? Or are we going to actually get a grip of this and, as Derek has just said, find a way, hopefully by the end of 20 years, of making this a truly sustainable and growing diocese, both financially in order to put it back into mission and ministry, but mainly in terms of mission and ministry. Okay? Do you want to add?
Just to give you a sense of what happened the last time we put a 5-year budget together, which we did in 2013 and 14 for 2015 to 2020, which was actually a 6-year budget. We thought it was 5, but we couldn't realise that 15 to 20 actually covers 6 years, not 5. So that should give you confidence about our maths anyway. The way we did that, just for information, was we had a resourcing working group which was chaired by the then Bishop of Penrith and which involved, I think Val Hallard was part of that working group. It involved the chair of the Board of Finance. It might have involved someone else, I can't remember, plus myself and Rick's equivalent, Neil, who is here. So we had a vehicle for doing the work, which brought the Bishop's Council and the Finance Committee together, and the results from that then went to a joint meeting of the Finance Committee and the Board of Finance. So it's quite easy to integrate the process like that. People just have to be clear which sort of hat they're wearing when they come to a meeting, or be conscious that they're wearing more than one hat. So I don't know what the process will be for setting the next multi-year budget, but it'll be something like that. And that involved pretty much a bottom-up exercise. It involved a set of fairly objective criteria about what we wanted to spend money on. So did it support the strategy? Did it provide value for money, etc., etc.? And we scored a whole range of spending plans that people brought forward, and we took the ones that scored the most. We sort of did a moderation exercise, and then we said, these are the plans, this is how much money we've got, and we drew a line across the plans at the point where we would run out of money, and we did the things above it. And it worked really well, actually, and we pretty much stuck to that through 2015 to 2019, and then 2020 happened, which means we need to do something like that again.
I'm conscious that we're eating seriously into the time for discussion on the Kairos resolution. But if anybody has really got a burning issue they wish to raise, this is the chance. Otherwise, I'm going to ask you, Rick?
I'll make this incredibly quick. I just want to say 3 things off the back of the last 18 months that we've all been through, and the financial side of it. First of all, it's probably been said a lot of times, but do take our thanks back to your parishes, your mission communities, and your deaneries, because their resilience, their resolve to keep the money coming in has been really incredible. And we don't take it for granted. We really don't. We sit and we look at budgets and accounts and blah blah blah, but it's a massive job that they've done the last 18 months. Secondly, particularly for those of you that are new to Synod, please do try to engage with the money. You don't have to become financial experts, but do hold us to task and ask us difficult questions if you want to, because We'd far rather you were engaged with the financial side than just thought it was for someone else. And thirdly, I will champion the treasurer's role. Others will do the same for church wardens and secretaries, etc., and obviously for clergy, but treasure your treasurers. They've had a torrid time, as have all church officials, but I'll wave the flag for the treasurers. Give them a socially distanced hug. They've been amazing. That's what I just wanted to say.
Thanks a lot, Rick. I'm going to ask you formally now, please, to approve the budget for 2022, which is in front of you. Does anybody disagree that we should adopt it? Thank you very much. And in closing, therefore, I wish to thank the trustees and directors who have served over the last 3 years or more. They're all volunteers. We have a great team. If they're standing for re-election, good luck. If not, thank you very much. It's been good having you on board. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you very much for all of that, and we move straight on now to item number 10 on the agenda, Kairos Palestine, Solway Deanery Synod motion, and it's being introduced by Val Hallard.
I'm just testing this out for sound. Is it clear to everybody? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, we'll taking this debate beyond our shores now into the land that we call holy. And it's probably further than most of us have travelled in the last couple of years. Members of the previous synod will remember that in June 2019, Solway Deanery brought a motion asking the diocese to support the document A Moment of Truth, a word of faith and hope and love from the heart of Palestinian suffering, which became known as Kairos Palestine. Although it was passed by the synod, it was not deemed to be in a form that could be forwarded on to General Synod as a Diocesan Synod motion. Last year, the Kairos Palestine group, made up of Palestinian Christian churches in Israel and Palestine, along with international partners in Global Kairos for Justice, have issued a successor document 10 years on from the original, called Cry for Hope, a call for decisive action. So this motion, seeking a response from the General Synod, has been passed at Solway Deanery Synod and brought to you today. But you will see on your agenda the motion that was passed by Solway Deanery Synod, but Dave has projected the motion that we're debating today. The Deanery motion was sent to the clerk to the General Synod, who has circulated it for comment, in order that the motion may be most effectively put to General Synod should we pass it today. I will give you the opportunity. Obviously, you can read the motion now on the screen. There's 3 key points. The first is to endorse the cry for hope expressed by Palestinian Christians and the Global Kairos for Justice Coalition. And this is something that we can do as individuals, as churches, as deaneries, as dioceses, and hopefully as the Church of England. It asks us to address and look at theological justifications for the oppression of the Palestinians. The General Synod clerk came back and said, of course, there's no biblical justification for the oppression of Palestinians, but there are some arguments that suggest that there are. And the third area is to look at what our finances are doing as a church, and are any of them invested in the occupation and therefore the suffering of the Palestinian people. So the motion asks us to endorse the cry for hope in principle and to respond to 2 of the particular requests it makes. It makes 6 specifics, and we'll come on to those briefly at the end. but namely those to address the theological and ideologies that justify the oppression of Palestinians, and to respond to guidance that will enable us to screen our current and future Church of England and diocesan investments to avoid being complicit. The background paper G, which I hope you've been able to study, provides you with an understanding of the very difficult situation that Palestinian Christians in Israel and Palestine face. If you look at it, it doesn't look to me like the outworking of the kingdom of God. We need to debate this motion, but I'm also very aware that Cry for Hope is about listening to and amplifying to a wider audience the voices of our Palestinian Christian sisters and brothers, which have been silenced in various ways. For this reason, I want to focus my introduction today on their direct experience and their call in Cry for Hope, which states, "We have arrived at a critical point in the struggle to end the oppression of the Palestinian people. The State of Israel's adoption of the nation-state law in 2018 legitimized institutional discrimination in Israel and the Palestinian territories. The nation-state law in Principle 1C of 3 principles is the exercise of the right to national self-determination in the State of Israel is unique to Jewish people. Since then, 2 internationally respected human rights organizations, B'Tselem, which is an Israeli organization, which produced this report in January 2021, and Human Rights Watch in April 21, have both declared Israel to be an apartheid state. Cry for Hope identifies with the Christian responses to racism in apartheid South Africa, where the church's silence or complicity placed the church in status confessionis. There was a need to identify our complicity. So the World Communion, I'll read directly from Cry for Hope. So the World Communion of Reformed Churches, WCRC, in 2017 affirmed that, with respect to the situation of injustice and suffering that exists in Palestine and the cry of the Palestinian Christian community, that the integrity of Christian faith and practice is at stake. Also in 2017, in the open letter to the World Council of Churches and the ecumenical movement, the National Coalition of Christian Organizations in Palestine wrote, "Things are beyond urgent. We are in the verge of a catastrophic collapse. This is no time for shallow diplomacy, Christians." The last 4 years, particularly under the Trump administration in the US, have been bleak. Trump declared that he had moved the US Embassy to Jerusalem for the evangelicals. Vice President Mike Pence in the Israeli Knesset declared, "We stand with Israel because your cause is our cause, your values are our values, and your fight is our fight. We stand with Israel because we believe in right over wrong, good over evil, and liberty over tyranny." You can imagine how Palestinian Christians felt about that. They feel invisible to the outside world. They're all too easily silenced through deplatforming and accusations of anti-Semitism. They are community leaders in non-violent and creative resistance to the occupation, but we make life unnecessarily difficult for them in their relationship with their Muslim neighbours, since Western Christians are generally thought to be supporters of the occupation. Dean Munter Isaac of Bethlehem Bible College asks us to avoid the common descriptor of conflict in the Holy Land, pointing out that that word implies a balance of power, which does not exist. He says, call it what it is, an occupation. Finally, Cry for Hope asks us to initiate processes that recognise the urgent requirement for action. Our ecumenical partners, the United Reformed Church and the Methodist Church in Cumbria, are further along this road than we are. It asks us to engage in study and discernment about how the Bible has been used to justify oppression of the Palestinian people, and seeking instead to recognise our Creator God of love, mercy, and justice. It asks us to affirm the Palestinians' rights to resist occupation, dispossession, and the abrogation of their rights and their dignity. It asks us to demand that all means are used to recognise and stop violations of international law. It asks us to oppose anti-Semitism, but also oppose the equating of criticism of Israel's unjust actions with anti-Semitism. It asks us to support initiatives between Israelis and Palestinians that promote mutual respect and dignity. And it asks us to come and see the reality with compassionate eyes. And I'd say, go to Bethlehem. When you go to Bethlehem, if you go on a standard tour of Israel, you're probably on a tourist bus, and you'll go to Bethlehem on a coach and be unloaded on Manger Square, have maybe 2 hours to visit the Church of the Nativity and maybe grab a coffee or a drink, because Bethlehem, being a largely Christian town, has bars and restaurants. But then you get back on the coach and disappear. If you're on a tour, people will say to you, "Oh, I wouldn't go to Bethlehem, it's an Arab town. It'd be dangerous." And I was talking to a friend who said her life was changed because she wanted to go to Bethlehem independently, and she did. And when she went, she started talking to people, and she met someone. They said, "We're just having a wedding. Come and join us. Come and join the celebration." And the spirit of acceptance, welcome, and hospitality is second to none. I've walked around the streets and been offered pita bread from a bakery and a cup of coffee when I asked for directions. A gentleman said, "Oh, I'm going that way." I was going to visit the Christian aid projects, actually, that were in Beit Zahor, but I didn't know where they were, so I set off to walk in that direction. And this gentleman took me along, and he said, "Well, you've just got that bit further to go, but we'll come in and have a coffee with my wife." It's that sort of place, and so I would commend going to Bethlehem. But all 6 of these actions are things we can take part in individually, and as I say, in groups, and possibly by voting for them today. The motion identifies 2 specific ones that are for the Church of England to respond to, and in terms of the study, the second one, again, we can do that in our own communities as well. So I'd like to really give you the time for questions. I just wanted to, I don't know if anyone's been puzzled about this picture. Just be careful about my cable. I just wanted to share it with you because it moved me greatly. I'll try not to be too moved now. It's by a young Gazan artist. She's 21, and she's experienced 4 wars in her lifetime. And in 2014, there was 51 days of bombardment in Gaza when she was confined to home. And obviously, it's very stressful for that situation. We know what COVID's like, and this was bombardment. And so she picked up some paper that she had from school and some watercolours, and she started painting to express how she felt. And she's now a recognised artist. She's training in Istanbul, and she has a worldwide following. But this picture in particular moved me because it's entitled, "When Peace Dies, Embrace Her, She Will Live Again." Okay. Sorry to leave you on that note. I do take serious questions, and I just wanted to share the picture with you. Thank you.
Val, thank you very much. Indeed, we do have time for speeches from others and contributions from others if they would like to make them, or questions to Val. Perhaps if you're putting up your hand, you could say which you want to do. Cameron. A contribution? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Val, for your presentation. I'm a member of yet another hat I wear, of the Partnership in World Mission Group. And in looking at the 3-year cycle that we're presently part of, we work with Christian Aid to look at projects that we could follow. And one of the projects we were looking at was with the Palestinian Church and Palestinian Christians. And we offered support from the Bishop's Harvest Appeal, and they turned it down because they said they didn't want to receive money from a country that supported the occupation of their homeland. So we had to do quite a lot of work to say, no, we genuinely want to help you in Christian fellowship. We're all members of the same church. And so we're in the 2nd year of 3-year cycle of supporting Palestinian Church as part of the Bishop's Harvest Appeal. We are part of a worldwide church, and our Christian brothers and sisters are suffering great hardship, very often not covered by the media. The Chaldean Church in Iraq has suffered. Our fellow Christians, especially in Syria, have suffered, and many have been driven out from their own homes and communities, and their churches destroyed. The Coptic churches in Egypt and in the Arabian Peninsula have been subject to attack. We have the opportunity this afternoon to symbolically, and perhaps it is only symbolically, but importantly, to say that as a diocese we stand alongside the Palestinian Christians and our fellow Christians in the Middle East. We have an opportunity to say to the General Synod of the Church of England, Church nationally, this is a vitally important issue, and the Church should be speaking up on behalf of our fellow Christians throughout the world. But most of all, I would encourage you to vote in favour of Solway Deanery's motion, because it will say to those Palestinians who said to us, we don't want to receive your money because you're part of the problem, to say, no, we don't want to be part of the problem. We want to stand alongside you, and we want to see peace restored and hope restored to the Palestinian Christians where you're living. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Cameron. Vernon.
Thank you. To follow on from Cameron, I think it's really important as a synod we send out a message to the persecuted church, of which the church in Palestine is one. And I think on a regular basis we need to think about the global persecution of our fellow Christians across the world on a regular basis. So that's one point. Second one is, I have vested interest, I have Jewish heritage. I think it's perfectly reasonable to challenge the political state of Israel when it's doing wrong. That does not equate to anti-Semitism.
John.
This has been a subject which has been in my heart for some years now. I was very moved to read a few years ago a book written by a Palestinian Christian. He told of his departure as a younger person in the 1940s, how his family were thrown out of his olive grove in a small village, and how he himself then in later years became a priest in one of the churches in the Palestinian community. It moved me substantially, and I think Palestinian Christians have been profoundly unfairly treated over the years. The Zionist movement, which I had previously very much not supported in any way, but I thought was right, but it's not right, and Palestinian Christians are unfairly treated. We need to stand alongside them. I would love to go to Bethlehem myself to see things. I'm afraid I did go to a meeting a couple of years ago at the Church of Scotland in Carlisle, which are having a political meeting, and I found it far too politicalised because it was contrary to my own political views. But as far as the Palestinian cause is concerned, non-political, I want to stand alongside Palestinian Christians, and if I can do so, go to Bethlehem, even though I have a terrible fear of flying. Thank you.
Is anybody? Yes, Jim.
I wonder if the bishop, or indeed anybody who's been on General Synod, has a view as to whether General Synod will be responsive to this initiative and will indeed broaden it, not just to the Palestinians, because you've got to start somewhere, but the danger perhaps with generalizing is you water the whole effect down, but you can't crack the whole world in one go. But nevertheless, this is a specific, and if the General Synod was supportive and decided something could and should and would be done, then perhaps that model could be used in other cases specifically. But I just wonder, those who've been on Synod, whether they have any view as to what might happen next.
Thank you, Jim. Well, Val is on General Synod. You might like to respond first.
I think it might be not entirely welcomed by General Synod, because it does bring in visibility. And there are sensitivities around our relationship with the Jewish community in Great Britain. As Munter Isaac said, though, I mean, there are different opinions amongst the Jewish community in the UK, and there are those who also resist the occupation and act, demonstrate, etc., against it. So, you know, it's difficult because it's seen as political. And I think if it is passed here, it will be in the queue for debate. And I expect it to be very personally difficult as well, but that's as may be. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yes, just briefly. I suspect that it will actually get quite a degree of support on the floor of the House. I think there will be people in Synod and in the central institutions who will be wary of it. But I think in Synod itself, it would probably be well received.
Sure, that's probably about right. Val was absolutely right in saying that if we pass this motion, it will join a queue of other motions that have come from various diocesan synods around the country. That doesn't mean to say that they come for debate in due course, but I don't think we'd see it happen immediately.
I think if we do pass it, we would be encouraging the Palestinian Christians today.
Yeah.
So, and just can I respond to the point that was made over there? Thank you very much for your input. Just a little bit about the Church of Scotland, because it has established missions, schools, hospitals in the area that became Israel a long time ago. It's had a long-standing role in the Holy Land. Now, of course, it finds all its institutions located or the majority of them located within Israel. And that does put it in a slightly difficult position in terms of speaking out. That's all I probably need to say about that. I would,
Thank you. Any other comments, questions, offerings of any sort? I think we do from time to time take pilgrimages from the diocese out to the Holy Land. And the last one we took, which was 2 or 3 years ago, we had speakers each evening, and the speakers were almost entirely Palestinian Christians, or Palestinian Arabs, and we thought, gosh, well, just for the sake of a little balance, we ought to get a voice, the voice of the Israeli military. And so we managed to get hold of an Israeli soldier who was a woman. And she came and, rather to our surprise, launched into a massive attack on the Israeli army and the way in which it had behaved in pushing through the settlements that have sprung up and are springing up at a huge rate all over the Holy Land. And those who have been will know the wall that has now been built, which is not dissimilar to the Berlin Wall between East and West Berlin, and through which people have to pass, often to get to their work. And for Palestinians doing that, including some farmers, this can take up to 2 or 3 hours, morning and evening, every day, with massive humiliation along the way. Thank you. Yes. It's Julia. I couldn't see who you were behind your mask.
Just to comment on that, while we were at Ridley, we went to Tantur for 3 weeks, where we were guest. Tantur is a house which is, it actually belongs to the Vatican, but it's all aimed at reconciliation between Jews and Palestinians. And we'd been into Bethlehem. There was one Sunday where we could choose where we went to church. So on this particular, we'd been into Bethlehem on the Saturday, and we'd met some Palestinian Christians in a bookshop. So they invited us to their church service on the Sunday. So we went to this service, which was in the basement of a hotel. It was amazing. It was also the day that Tony Blair was visiting Bethlehem. So we were going, obviously we had to get through the wall to go to between Tantur and Bethlehem. So we came out of the service early. It was a long service. We were going back to the wall just to get through. On the way through, it had taken us minutes because we had British passports. On the way back, because of the security around Tony Blair, we ended up in a very long queue of people. And we saw the way that the Palestinians were treated, and it was appalling. We saw one young couple who they'd managed to get a permit for one day. They got to the front of the queue. The soldier didn't like the look of them and sent them to the back. And we were next to a little group of Palestinian Christians who worked in the cathedral in Jerusalem. And they were on their way into the cathedral. And we got into conversation with them, and one of them said, "This is normal for us." And we were kind of saying, "Well, how do you cope with it?" And she said, "The Lord is teaching us a lot about patience." When we got to the front of the queue, because we had British passports, we were through in seconds. But it was deliberate humiliation.
Thank you very much. Andrew? Yep, question.
Thank you very much, Val. Have any other provinces of the Anglican Communion endorsed the documents that you've talked about, or other dioceses in the Anglican Communion, just out of interest?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to it. I'll have to check.
Okay.
But they certainly haven't got a motion to General Synod yet.
Good, well, it can be the first then. Good.
Thank you. I mean, this is a debate about justice, which is not something we have very frequently, actually, even though it's such a fundamental Christian virtue. Yeah, Jim, another word.
Very briefly, what concerns me is, if we decide that this is something we want to support, in general, as well as the meeting, I think we probably will, and it goes to Synod, and Synod bury it, even though they might say nice things about it, what message does that send to the Palestinians? Because if they find, as Val has said, they might be heartened if this resolution goes through here. If it then goes up and gets ditched, that's worse than not having started.
So my suggestion is that, my wonder is, what's going to cause the least damage? Because the last thing we want to do is for the Church of England to send mixed messages out on a specific issue like this. You're either united or you're not. And I worry about the consequences if this is passed here and goes no further.
If I can just respond to that, I think the conversations Val has already had suggest that it would be properly debated when it comes off the end of the queue, and that would apply to absolutely any debate that comes from a diocesan synod. So I don't think there's a danger of it being buried. It's just a matter of how long it would take to come up to the top of the list. Now we've got Chris, we've got James, we've got... And Neil, did you want to?
Just very briefly, I think when it comes before Synod, the risk is actually that it doesn't get a sufficiently large majority.
Yeah.
I don't think it would be voted down in Synod. But for these motions to be really effective, you're looking for a vote that's as near unanimous as you can get it.
Thank you. James?
I think it was Desmond Tutu who said that if you're silent in the face of oppression, then you're colluding with the oppressors. I think even if there is a risk that General Synod was voting it down, actually raising the fact that there are people who are supporting will be a good thing in itself. It may be problematic for the Church of England and its image if General Synod then votes it down, but I don't think we should say nothing because of that. Otherwise, we're simply colluding with the state of affairs as it currently is.
Thank you very much. Neil, did you? Right. James said what Neil was going to say.
Can I respond, Bishop James?
Yes, please, Val.
If there's no further debate on that point. For one thing, General Synod is available on the internet, so people can watch it. And the second argument is there won't be any arguments that the Palestinian Christians haven't heard before. And if they hear people standing up in a forum that is difficult and speaking on their behalf with their words as far as possible, then I believe we will have done the right thing.
Thank you. Yes, Nikki.
And I think as well that it's really important that we take on board our responsibility to educate and inform those that we represent in our churches, parishes and mission communities. Because things like this need to actually be at the forefront of the mission of the church.
Thank you. I don't see anybody else wanting to speak. So Val, do you want to say anything by way of conclusion before we vote on this?
I don't think so. I've appreciated the debate, if we could call it debate. I'm very grateful, and I'm happy to move the motion. Or do you have to do that? I'm sorry, I don't know.
Yes, I think you can move it. Do we need a seconder, Derek? No. So, Val is moving the motion that you have in front of you. We'll take it as one motion, not in its various little bits. It is a complete whole, and we are saying that this is something we will send to General Synod for debate there and some sort of conclusion. So those in favour of the motion, please raise a hand. Those against? Anybody wish to abstain? That motion is very comprehensively carried. Thank you very much, Val, for bringing it. Indeed, and to those in Solway Deanery Synod. Very important issue to be brought to us and now to be taken on to the Church of England as a whole. We know what Derek's maths is like. He told us earlier on.
According to the count I did of the total number of people here, and the fact there was one abstention and no votes against, it's 59 in favour and 1 against.
One abstention.
Pardon?
One abstention.
One abstention.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Very good. Thank you very much for your participation in that. We have no private members' motions, of which I'm aware. And so we have got about 8 minutes for any questions, if there are any, that anybody would like to ask about anything, the meaning of the universe, the number of toads you can find under a stone. Yeah, we got a question. Great. Thank you.
It's Jan Collins-Webb from Loweswater Mission Community of Cockermouth and surrounding areas. As God for All is at our forefront of everything we do now, I believe there are people in the villages that are a bit worried about what's happening now that Bishop Emma has gone.
Yep.
And I understand what we've been discussing today, but is there any way that we, as a synod, or the people involved here, can actually help to reach out and communicate the vital parts and steps of God for All? Because it's not being heard, because we now haven't got Emma, and we've got a lot of people that are not around anymore, and there are people in virtual, so it really does need some sort of impetus to actually go forward with that, otherwise it's going to be lost. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I was indicating earlier on that I'm planning to come round to, well, certainly to deaneries. I'd like to come to mission communities, but that would probably take too long. Early next year, so in a couple of months' time, however long it is, 3 months' time, my maths are not up to much either. And we'll be promoting God for All, and hopefully we'll have a certain amount of sort of literature and things to go with it by then. It won't be the final finished article, because the consultation on that will take a little longer, but it will give people a very good idea of what it's all about, where we're heading, and what the next steps are. And I think we'll be involving a number of people in that process, not just me. So thank you. It's a very, very important question. Yeah. Any other? Yes, Tudor.
Bishop James, as NHS lead, Bishop, are there particular things that we should be praying for the NHS at this time from your perspective?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch it. Is that things to pray about?
Yes, what can we be praying in our churches for the NHS with your insight as lead bishop?
NHS, fine. Thank you very much indeed. Well, gosh, where does one begin? Thank you. It's a really important question. I think the whole question of social care at the moment, and what's happening with social care and the integration of social care with the NHS, is a major thing. I'm meeting fairly shortly with the new head of the NHS to talk about exactly that. And I'm co-chairing a commission on the future of social care and what it should look like. And we've had the thing from Mr. Johnson about the social care levy. We got a debate about that in the House of Lords on Monday. But no money comes through into social care for another couple of years. And meanwhile, there are serious issues of workforce, of health, of demoralization of staff, and so on and so on. And one of the things that's very clear is that although at last somebody is saying we will put some more money into social care, what they're not saying is what that social care should look like when it gets there, and that's one of the main points that I'm trying to make. So prayer about social care is important, but also prayer for NHS staff, many of whom are really struggling. I'm going down to Portsmouth next week to do a talk on the healing ministry post-pandemic. Now, we're not completely post-pandemic yet, but we are hopefully beginning to emerge. And one of the things that I've been discovering, both from the reading I've been doing and also from personal observation around the place, is the number of staff who are off sick, who are absolutely exhausted, and who are having panic attacks and often feeling very guilty because they've been under such pressure. And certainly in ITU, where in the past people have been looking after, say one patient or possibly two, they've been looking after multiple patients, and they're worried that perhaps in some of those cases, if they'd been able to care for them better, they might not have died. So huge pressure emotionally, mentally, and physically on many of the staff, and I think we're only just beginning to see the problems emerging. So help for them and how we provide it is a big part of the issue. I think we all have a part to play in that, actually, because we probably all know people who work for the NHS, such an enormous organisation, and there are certainly people in our parishes who do. And just being alongside them and caring for them and being aware of the pressure that they've been under, which hasn't gone unnoticed. There's been quite a lot written about it and said about it. But I think now that we're beginning to emerge, people forget all that. And we go back to our favourite occupation of bashing the NHS rather than clapping for it. And actually, the people who are working for it really, really need our thanks and our care, because they're under great pressure. And what Stephen Wright was saying earlier on about the caring for the carers thing is really important. The people who've been on that already, we've had 19 so far, we've got another 41 coming up, and we've got a waiting list of 172, which shows just something of the need. That's just people from around here. That demonstrates, I think, the kind of exhaustion and very often demoralisation that's being felt. I don't know if there are those in the NHS or those who've worked for the NHS in the past here who would wish to add anything to that.
Only to reiterate the level of exhaustion.
Yeah.
Work with them and work alongside them at times.
Thank you. And mental health issues too, which we're seeing the tip of an iceberg, not just in the NHS, but among young people particularly and others. We're looking at a potential 1.8 million extra people who will need mental health care in the next 18 months.
I just wanted to absolutely back that up. As a lecturer of nurse education at Cumbria University, our students are struggling. They took up the challenge, they went out there, and the mental health strain, the suicides, the worry is very real. So yes, please pray for them.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions? Very good. Well, thank you very much, everybody, for being here in the first place. It is so lovely to meet together again rather than on Zoom, and to see you all. And thank you to those who are new. I hope you've enjoyed today. And look forward to your continuing engagement and involvement. And I hope you'll have seen that it's not quite as complicated as it all sounds. And you'll have realized how lovely everybody is who's a member of this particular group. So thank you very much indeed. Let's finish with a prayer. Father, we thank you for everything that we've discussed today. We pray for all the issues that have been touched upon, not least those of finance and buildings, and for wisdom, your wisdom, as we try to tackle those issues in the coming months. We pray for the people of Israel, Palestine, and for this motion as it goes on its way to General Synod, for its reception there, and for its eventual debate. And we pray for all our brothers and sisters in Christ around the world who are struggling today or being persecuted because of their faith. We pray for your presence to surround them. Pray that they may know your comfort and strength. And we pray for ourselves to see ways in which we can help and support them, not least through our prayers. And we continue to pray for everybody we know who's ill, who's recently been bereaved, or who is anxious about the future and what it holds. And we commit ourselves, the parishes from which we come, the people with whom we work, and those among whom we live, into your care and keeping. Pray for your grace, your blessing, and for safety as we travel home. In Jesus' name, amen.